Hello, welcome. My name's Jason White and this is Jason's Weird Reads, and today I am going to be doing my top 10 books that I've read in 2024 so far. This is only, well, it's July now. It's July the 1st. Happy Canada Day. I have read so far 47 books. That's pretty good for me. And I struggled like hell coming up with this list, but I'm going to tell you right now some rules that I have. First rule is that they can be any year. They can be backlist books and they can be new books that make this list, so there's a mixture. And no collections of short stories, and no friends. No friends of mine can make this list. So, and I just do that to keep it fair, and also I might be biased. But, you know, this is my list. I could add those if I wanted to. Also, I did that because it gets difficult. Like, this year was difficult. I had to take out some books because I've had a really good reading year so far. As I said, this list was difficult to make. So how about we get into it? This is in no particular order, by the way. So I'm going to start off with The Day of the Door by Laurel Hightower. This book was, it was a lot of fun. It was different, kind of, from what I'm used to reading Laurel Hightower, but it was still very well done. It's about a family who sort of reunite, in a sense. It's a very traumatic, abusive family, and they with a very evil mom. Let's just leave it at that. They reunite to check out the haunted house in which they all grew up in, and one of their brothers died in. They go there to confront each other about what happened and to confront the ghosts. And this house is not shy. It is very haunted, but there's something else going on at the same time. And there's a camera crew there. They're recording it all for like a web series. And this book it's good. It's really good. It's a lot of fun. Moving on, like I said, these aren't in order. I will have them tiered, though, at the end of the year. So next up is The Wastelands by Stephen King. This is book 3 of the Dark Tower series. So far, this is my favorite of the Dark Tower series. And if you're unaware, Sin from Sin's Book Nook and I are doing a she's a guest on my podcast, and we're doing a series on the podcast, which is Weird Reads, and where we're discussing each book, one episode per book. And so far it's been a lot of fun. And this book, The Wastelands, so far is the most fun book in that series, I thought. And it was also the most fun conversation I've had with Sin about a book. I think the book contributed to that because of just how crazy and crazy fun it is to read. Next up was a first time for me. I never read Rachel Harrison before, and so I started with her first book, The Return. Now, The Return is about 4 friends, 4 female friends, 4 women friends who like to hang out on weekends and whatnot. They grew up together, and when they got older, some of them moved away, but they still, get together occasionally and, have a few drinks and just party together. But then one of them goes missing. She has a fight with her husband and goes for a hike and is never seen again. And 2 years later, she's presumed dead. They even have a funeral for her. But then she returns, hence the title. So she returns, and the girls decide to have another weekend bash to celebrate their friend's return. When she returns, she doesn't remember anything that happened to her. So they also, the other 3 friends want to try to figure out what happened on that weekend. They want to know. This is like their best friend. It's like found family type thing. So they want to know, and so they get together and in this weird little hotel for a weekend, and it doesn't go well. Let's just say that there's something wrong with their friend who went missing. I really love this book. It's definitely not going to be my last Rachel Harrison. I want to read more by her as soon as possible, and she has a book coming out this year that's a vampire book, and I would love to check that out. All right. Next up, I have Come With Me by Ronald Malfi. This is my second Ronald Malfi book that I remember reading, because I think I read one way back in 2010, around there somewhere, 2011, but I don't remember, honestly. I can't find it either on my Goodreads, so it's possible I just thought I read him but didn't. Anyways, but now I have read two, and Come With Me was my second, and the first one was Blackmouth, which I read at the end of last year, made my top 10 list of the year, and it blew me away. Come With Me is another fantastic tale by Ronald Malfi, and I'm certain he's going to be a favorite new author now. Come With Me is about a man who loses his wife, and during the grieving process, he finds some receipts to a hotel that she went to while he was out of town for a weekend, and so he starts digging more. And at first, he thinks she was cheating on him, but then he learns that she was doing something. She was I'm not going to get into it because that'll spoil the whole book. But this book it's not really a horror book. It's more of a thriller, and I wouldn't even say there's if there are supernatural elements in it, they're very, very light. But it's definitely a thriller. But it sort of reads in a sense like a horror novel. It just has that horror novel feel to it, even though there's really no horror. But I love this book. It's fantastic, and cementing Ronald Malfi as a favorite. Next up, I finally read Headful of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. I don't know why I didn't read this book for so long. It's just one of those things, you know. I've been wanting to read it since it came out, like in 2015, because everyone was raving about it, so I went and bought it, and then it just sat on my shelf and I never read it. But I have read it now, and I'm so glad I did, because, well, you probably know what this is about. It's about a reality show, sort of. It's sort of the main character is looking back on the reality show that was centered around her older sister, who was quite possibly possessed. And the reality show, well, you have to read the book if you haven't read it yet. But I highly recommend it if you haven't read it. The ending was just something that made me stare at a wall for like an hour after I read it. It was just incredible. I was not expecting it to end that way, but it did. Weird, crazy-ass book. And Paul Tremblay really is the master of ambiguous endings. I'll just leave it at that, because I can't speak today. Alright, so next up I have House of Bad Memories by Michael David Wilson. I read this book, and well, he contacted me asking if I would read this book and review it on my channel, and probably, you know, on all the other platforms like Amazon and Goodreads, which I still haven't done yet. I gotta do. But I read it also while he was in contact with me over reviewing it. I was like, hey, why don't you come on the show? And he was kind enough to say yes, and he came on the show, and we talked for about 2 hours. It was one of the most incredible conversations I've ever had on you know, interviewing authors. And but House of Bad Memories was also one of the most incredible books I've read. This book is one of those books where it's not very tense in the first maybe third of it, but then something happens in it, and I don't want to talk about it too much because you really got to go into this book blind. And the premise of the book is a man goes back to his old hometown. He's going to his stepdad's funeral, and he learns a lot about what's going on with the family. It's about a guy who goes back home, and he ends up being mixed up with the mob, and there is a supernatural element to the second half, the end of it. This book, getting back to the tension, the first third isn't really all that tense, but once a certain thing happens, the tension goes up, and then it just keeps going up and up and up until you don't know how Michael David Wilson is doing this. How is he keeping this so tense? I finished this book within a couple of days because of how tense it was. I can't recommend it enough. I loved it. Next up, I read this book recently. I have to say, I did not have fun listening to this book, but it still blew me away. And that's Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt. Recently I did a video the LGBTQ recommendations video, and it was, somebody messaged me either in the comments there or somewhere else saying if you liked, if you like those authors, you need to check out this book. So I had a little bit of space, and I decided to get the audiobook. So they recommended the audiobook too. They said that the narrator really knocked it out of the park, and they certainly did. This book, especially the audiobook, is incredible. It's about human rights, it's about trans rights, it's about LGBTQ rights. It's also about fascism and how fascism is back on the rise. I'm going to leave it at that because this book really comes across as like an art house piece. If it were made into a movie, like A24 would have to make it or something and turn it into one of their more artistic pieces. And there's a lot of rants. The main character goes into these rants. There's two main characters, I would say, and it splits up the point of view. So I would call the main character the one, Alice, who's the first person narrative, and then there's a second character, and I can't remember her name, but she's in third person narrative. It's that kind of book where it's you could call it literary if you wanted. I know literary has a bad name these days. I don't think it should. It's just a style, and this definitely kind of has that style to the writing. It's very experimental in a sense, but not overly experimental, and it goes into rants, and sometimes you have to wonder exactly what's going on. I love this book. I think it's a very important book, and like I said, it's not fun. It's very bleak, and it's angry. This book is pissed. This book is pissed, and it has every right to be pissed off. I highly recommend it if you want to know what, especially over in Europe, but I imagine this fits well in with North America as well, what it's like being a trans woman or a trans man, and it's not pleasant. I mean, this book sort of details why mental illness and suicides are so high with people who are in the LGBTQ, especially the transgender community. All right, next up was a fun book, and this one shocked me, honestly. I wasn't expecting it to be so gory. I mean, this book gets really gory. And Nicholas Kaufman isn't really known, at least not in the books I've read of his. They weren't necessarily all that gory. But this one goes kind of for the throat. And it's The Mindworms, as I said, by Nicholas Kaufman. I read this to talk to him about it, and I'm so glad I did, because this is definitely my favorite of the series, the Dr. Laura Powell series. This is the third book, and I'm not too sure if there's going to be any more books in this series. I guess it might end as a trilogy. It seems to me Nicholas Kaufman is happy to move on. I'm not too sure, but at the time he was saying it depended on the sales of this book, if the series would continue or not. I guess we'll see. Well, maybe in a couple years there will be another one. If the series was to end, I think it would be really, really cool for Nicholas Kaufman to at least to end it. I don't know, kill off the characters or something. I don't know. I don't want the main characters to die in the series, but I guess it would be nice to have some closure. I don't know. All right, next up was another new author that I haven't read before, and that is Razor Blade Tears by S.A. Cosby. This was a fun story as well. It's a crime story. There's no horror in it, but horror readers are drawn to S.A. Cosby, and I find that great, honestly. And this was my first, and it won't be my last. I love this book. Razor Blade Tears is about two fathers whose sons got married, and they weren't comfortable with their sons marrying. They're both like manly men. One of them is they're both very tough. One's they're both ex-criminals, but one sort of reformed himself, has his own business, and he's trying not to be that guy from his past that got himself in jail. He has like a landscaping business. He takes it very seriously. He has a staff, you know, buildings and all these tools and stuff. He doesn't want to lose that. The other guy is a drunk, and he doesn't give a shit. He wants revenge for what happened to his son. And so he goes to the other father, the other grieving father, and he says, we got to get revenge. It takes a little bit of convincing, but finally the second father, Ike, it's Ike and Buddy Lee. Buddy Lee is the drunk, and Ike is the reformed criminal, if that's what you want to call him. They decide they're going to go get revenge, and they do. That's the plot. That's the plot right there. You don't read it for the plot, you read it for the story. Because the characters, their bantering is like classic, and their characters are just like, I called their names up in my head, and I usually can't do that. Like, I remember these characters very well. I love them. And I read this book like a few months ago, so I shouldn't be able to remember their names. But I do, because they're fantastic characters. And they each got a lot of stories. They each got a lot of character, and it makes me want to read more Essay Cosby as soon as possible. And lastly, here was another book I read for an interview on the channel here and the podcast, of course. And that's The Haunting of Velwood by Gwendolyn Keist. This book is, I would say, my favorite of Gwendolyn Keist's as well. I've talked about this book. Well, actually, I've talked about a lot of these books extensively on this channel. But just to give you a short rundown of what The Haunting of Velwood is about, it's about a community, a street, within what's going to be a new community in a town that suddenly becomes inaccessible due to like this fog-like substance that people can't enter or leave. The only people who can enter it are the people who lived there and escaped in the first place. Now it has vibes of like Silent Hill and a bunch of other books that I can't remember right now, but this book itself goes into some serious weird territory that just tickles my brain. I absolutely love this book, and I'm hoping that it makes the end of the year list as well, because it's one of the first books I read this year, and it was an absolute blast to read. I loved it. I really liked the mystery behind it. I also liked once we enter that town with some of the returning characters, we get to see just how weird it is inside. It becomes like a movie by David Lynch in a sense. Like if this movie, or if this book were ever to be adapted, it would be interesting to see what David Lynch would do with it, honestly. I think he would have fun with the premise, and I would love that. Alright, so that is my top 10. My best of 2024 so far. And I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know deep down there in the darkness what some of your favorite reads are so far this year. And leave me a stack of books, and I'll leave you guys a stack of books in return. Thank you for watching. Keep being creative and keep being weird, my friends, and I'll catch you guys in the next bookish video.